Yo, what's up guys? Josh the Grinder here and welcome back to the channel. I actually took a day off yesterday. As you guys saw in the last vlog, we had an absolute marathon session, which was like an 11-hour session here at Resorts World, but biggest win of the year, a little over 1,300. So we're actually on a 10 session win streak, which is crazy for me to say just because I've been a lifelong losing player. So normally I just lose a couple buy-ins and leave empty-handed. But now, I'm a winning player so far. So looking to get the data points, looking to get the hours to solidify the fact that I'm currently a profitable player. All thanks to Coach Arrow Poker. He graciously took me under his wing and I'm basically his apprentice right now, his poker apprentice. And yeah, I actually took yesterday off just because I didn't get good sleep and I honestly wasn't feeling the best. So I just figured like I just want to take a rest day. I hadn't taken a rest day for like 16 days or something. I gotta check my poker tracker app. But yeah, I also didn't like how in a few spots I just got super lucky. Primarily the 8-9 suited hand and the Jack-3 suited hand. More specifically, the Jack-3 suited hand. I felt like the 8-9 suited hand I played fine, but the Jack-3 suited hand I was ready to rep any bluff. And if the flush draw got there, maybe I would have got called down. So luckily I hit trips. But even though I didn't play that well on that hand, I do feel like overall the session went well just because I was making good moves, made a few big folds, and yeah, I just felt like it was such a long session I needed to take a day off. So now we're back at Resorts World. It's currently Sunday night or Monday morning, and yeah, August 4th, I believe. So we're just gonna hit the Resorts World 1-3 street, basically reset, took a day off and just want to continue playing profitable poker, playing tight, playing right, playing in a position. Basically imagining if my coach Arrow Poker was shouldering me, would he be proud or would he be shaking his head in disappointment? So with that being said, got my initial session thoughts out of the way. Let's head on in to play some poker.
So in this first hand, we look down at Pocket Jacks, one of the best starting hands in the game, in Under the Gun +1, so we bump it up to $15, and the hijack and cutoff come along. Flop comes King 9-8 with 2 diamonds, so a flush draw on the board, and I have the Jack of Diamonds. Not the best flop for Pocket Jacks, just because it's quite connected, and there's also a king on there, so we lose to any king. So I go ahead and check, and the action checks around. The turn is one of the best cards in the deck. It's a Jack of Spades, so now we improve to a set, so I want to start building the pot and bet $25. The hijack quickly gets out of the way, but the cutoff doesn't think this is enough, as he min clicks it pretty much to $55. With middle set, I'm going nowhere, so I make the call. The river is a king of spades, now pairing the board, giving us a boat. I don't want the action to check through, so I make a pot size bet of $160, and the cutoff makes the call. I show my hand, and we're good. I think in hindsight on the turn, I could have actually probably re-raised his raise, and then gotten more money in, since it would have set me up for potentially a river jam. However, the way it played out, it might have actually worked out better just because if he had a king, then I pretty much made the maximum. Perhaps I could have bet even more or check raise in the river, but overall happy with how I played this hand. So in this next hand, the low jack and hijack limp. The cutoff, who's a kid, he's a young kid, and I played with him the previous night. He's definitely a character. He was like flexing his like $400,000 paycheck and then was just talking about how rich he was. The ironic thing is there was actually a guy who's a venture capitalist or like angel investor who's actually rich. So when the guy was saying he's like a millionaire, the angel investor was just like, oh, you only have 1 million? And it was pretty funny just because this kid was actually like, great for the game, but let's just say he eventually got thrown out. He was a white guy who kept saying the N-word and he was trying to get the dealer to say it, and then he was like kept tipping the dealer like, oh, do you want more, and like throwing $1 or like $5. I mean, he did tip the dealers a lot, but I kind of felt like it was a bit degrading the way he was doing it. But anyways, this guy was in the cutoff and he bumps up to $15. The button calls. I look down at pocket sevens, so I make the call from the big blind, and then the 2 limpers come along. The flop comes Jack Ace 7 rainbow, so we flop bottom set, and I go ahead and check, planning on check raising, but unfortunately no one bets, so the action checks around. The turn is a 4 of heart, now bring a flush draw. I go ahead and check once more to induce a bet so I can check raise. Fortunately, the low jack bets $5, the hijack calls, and then the annoying kid who kept flexing, he raises the $45, The button gets out of the way. I make the call. The low jack, who was the original $5 better, now shoves for $101. The hijack folds. The kid in the cutoff folds as well, and I make the call. So now we're all in. The river is queen of clubs. I show my hand. The guy who shoves shows ace-9 offsuit for top pair, mediocre kicker, and we take it down. This is another reason not to play ace-9 offsuit. I think before I got coaching from Coach Arrow, I thought this was actually a decent hand to play, like limp in, but the problem is you often are out-kicked, and then if you hit like an ace, you're probably not good. If you hit a 9, you could be good, but then you have no connection. So a hand such as 10-9 suited or even Jack-9 suited, you have way more outs of hitting like a straight or some other strong hand, whereas ace-9, you know, top, especially multi-way, is like rarely good if you hit the 9. So overall, I just feel like ace-9 offsuit's a pretty bad hand that can cost you a lot of money. And in this case, it cost that guy his whole stack. Now, I don't like how I kept slow playing. This is one thing you guys are going to see from a lot of my footage is I have a tendency to slow play and get myself into trouble. In this case, it worked out just because no one really had that strong of a hand. But you guys saw the run out. There's like a jack, ace, and queen out there. So if someone happened to have like king 10, then they would have got there on the river. So yeah, not happy with how I played this hand, but we ended up getting a decent result. So this next hand, the hijack, cutoff, and button all limp. I go ahead and make the call from the small blind, and the big blind checks his option. The flop comes jack 10 jack, so we have a pair, but the action checks through. The turn's an 8 of spades, now giving us an open ender. So I go ahead and bet $5, and the big blind folds. The hijack, who's the kid from the last hand, who ends up getting kicked out, eventually raises the $20. The cutoff calls, the button folds, and I go ahead and make the call as well. The river's a queen of diamonds, now giving us a straight. However, we still lose to any full house, and we don't have the nut straight. We lose to ace king. However, I don't think anyone has ace king here since it's a limp pot. So I go ahead and check just to see what the kid does. I felt like he was one of the guys you want to get involved with since, you know, he's capable of like just doing ridiculous bluffs. He apparently lost like tens of thousands of dollars in the high limit poker room, so he was just like a wild card. So he bets $50. The cutoff folds. I now raised $150 thinking I'm good, but then he insta calls and then he shows queen 9 offsuit for a straight as well, and we end up chopping the pot. Unfortunately, this is the last hand with this kid, as he soon gets thrown out for yelling the N-word like multiple times and is like, what the heck is this guy doing? I think it was like not the hard R, but I mean still, you can't be like saying that word ever. Like, I don't know what the fuck this guy is doing, but unfortunately he gets thrown out. He was actually running really hot up until that point. Like, he actually was winning a lot of pots, so it was one of those situations where we were all hoping he'd stay. And then after he got thrown out, the other like angel investor guy, who was a solid player, pretty tight, he ends up leaving. And then I believe our table breaks and we end up moving to a different table after this hand. So in the first notable hand on the new table, we basically have a limped pot, including myself. I limp from middle position with 10-8 suited. And then the small blind bumps it up to $15. So he's someone I played with in a previous occasion, I think the previous night or maybe the night before that. And he did a really insane bluff where, like, I forgot exactly what happened, but he did like a overbet shove of like 500 bucks into a pot of like 50 or $100 with one pair, and he ran into like a set, and it was a total donation hand. So that's just one thing to note out here as this hand develops. So he bumps it up to $15 from the small blind. The big blind folds. Under the gun +1 calls. I call. Low jack and hijack call. The cutoff folds. And the button also calls. So we're basically going 6 ways to a flop of 7, 10, 6. So we flop top pair with the gutter ball as well as a backdoor flush draw. So when the action checks over to us, we bet $60, which is around a 2/3 size pot bet. The low jack, hijack, and button all get out of the way, and now the small blind, who's the guy who donated the other night, he checked jams for $323. The under the gun +1 gets out of the way, and then I basically just like call instantly. Not like a snap call, but a quick call. And then the run out is king of clubs and king of diamonds, so he shows middle set turned into a boat with pocket sevens, and we lose this hand. I actually go over this hand with Coach Arrow, and this was a massive blunder. I felt like, first off, I shouldn't even be betting multi-way in this spot. I think I got greedy, and the action probably would have checked around, and I probably could have got away from it on the turn, or at least saw a cheap river and then gotten away from it. But then I bet like a pretty sizable bet here, which kind of committed me in a sense, especially because I had a read on this guy, which was completely wrong. I'm realizing that I'm still like a noob, so I shouldn't really rely on reads yet. I feel like reading people and like watching tells is honestly a better move that like is a lot harder than it seems. We're gonna actually see in the very next hand another read that goes wrong, but yeah, in hindsight, if I did want to bet, I should have bet like $20, maybe even $15 just to get information, and then if he raises, I can either call and proceed with caution or just fold, just because top pair mediocre kickers is not a good hand. And me getting it in on the flop when I'm way behind is something that I would have done in the past when my win rate was 27% and I was a losing player, just because I'm thinking, oh, you know, I can get the money in with the draw. But the truth is, you don't really want to get your money in when you're flipping at best, or in this case, I'm way behind. It's much better to be the guy with the set in this case where you're way ahead and then getting your money in. That's kind of how like crushers do it and profitable players. But obviously I make a huge blunder here and it ends up costing me over $300. Okay, so in this next hand, we are in the under the gun +1 with ace queen offsuit. So we bump it up to $15, and then the low jack, hijack, cutoff, button, and big blind all make the call. So yeah, going 6 ways to a flop with ace queen offsuit, which is not the ideal situation since you'd rather go heads up with this kind of hand. But the flop comes 7-8-8 with the club draw on board, and the action checks around. Their turn comes a queen of hearts, which seems like a good card, so when the big blind checks over to us, we bet $60 again. Similar sizing to the very last hand we just covered, a 2/3 size pot bet. The middle position gets out of the way. However, the hijack, who is a player who just sat down, now raises to $130, and he's been pretty active. I felt like he's playing a lot of hands. The cutoff, button, and big blind all get out of the way, and then I'm not going anywhere to this min click, especially since I already bet $60, so I go ahead and make the call. The river's an 8 of spades, which seems like a good card for me since now I, you know, have a boat. So if he had like pocket 9s, 10s, jacks, I'm beating those hands. So I go ahead and bet $120. The reason I made this bet was because I was actually carefully watching him when the river came, and he looked visibly very upset at the river. So I know you guys are probably watching this and probably thinking like, oh shit, don't bet. But like, I bet $120 because I thought it was good. And now this guy freaking goes all in for $250, which is not that much more. It's basically another min click. So I make the call. He shows ace 8 offsuit for quads, just quads. And then, yeah, we lose this pot. This is another hand I reviewed with Arrow, and it was an absolute overplay of ace queen. It was essentially the same mistake I made in the last hand where I made a big bet and then kind of made a bad call to the raise. However, in this case, it was like 2 streets instead of just getting it in on the turn. In hindsight, I think what I should have done was the exact same strategy that Arrow proposed, in the sense that I should have bet small for information, and then if I got raised, just fold, right? Like, I feel like what separates good players from bad players isn't that good players get better hands more often. Well, you could argue that good players play better hands more often just because their range is tighter, but good players are able to fold in these spots when the opponents are showing a lot of strength, whereas bad players, such as myself in these past 2 hands, just can't get away from just not nutted hands, right? Like, I'm just way too weak to be calling a raise here. Or honestly, I would say calling the raise is fine, but I'm just way too weak to be calling a jam on the river. Just because in the 1-3 streets, when people bet large in the river, they typically have it. So this was an absolute massive blunder that cost me, again, over $300. And yeah, just in these 2 hands, I lost over 1.5 buy-ins, since the buy-in at Resorts World is $400. So at this point in the session, we're down a little over $400 when the next notable hand happens. So the under the gun limps, the middle position opens the $25. The hijack, who's my full-time friend, calls. I go ahead and call from the button with 6-5 suited. The blinds get out of the way, and the limper under the gun calls as well. The flop comes 8-7 queen, 2 clubs. So we flop an open-ended straight draw. However, we have the dummy end. And the under the gun checks. The middle position original raiser bets $100, which is around a pot-sized bet. My friend in the hijack calls. I call with my open-ended straight draw, and the person who originally checked under the gun calls as well. The turn is the king of clubs, bringing in the front door flush draw, and the action checks around. The river is a great card for us as it gives us the straight, however the dummy end. So when the action checks over to me, I go ahead and just shove for $268, which is a little over a half pot bet, and everyone ends up folding. I table my hand just to show I had the goods, And yeah, obviously we take it down because everyone folds, but I don't know why I showed my hand. I think maybe because my friend was in it, and he definitely had me beat on the turn for sure. I mean, I had 6 high, but I think in general the consensus is don't show your hand unless you bluff and you want to try to like affect how someone plays in the future. There's no reason to show your hand ever. So yeah, I feel like this pot was kind of weird. I got lucky on the river obviously, and definitely shouldn't have shown my hand. So in the last notable hand of this session, there's a guy who is from LA. He is a loose aggressive player, but he was running extremely hot. And me and my friend were trying to figure out if he was a pro or not. I think I actually asked him in a future session and he said he doesn't play full time. But you never know. I feel like people who play full time typically don't want others to know that. Anyways, this guy was running it up and hitting everything. So he has a straddle on for $6. The low jack and hijack call. My friend in the small blind folds, and then I go ahead and make the call with 5-4 offsuit, and then he checks his option. The flop comes 3-3-7 with a club draw on board, and I, for some reason, bet $16. Yeah, I actually have no idea why I bet $16 here, like, now that I'm watching this a month later. Perhaps I thought that having a gutter ball was enough for me to start bluffing. Semi-bluff, maybe? But anyways, we go heads up to the turn, which is an ace of clubs. So the flush draw gets there, and the action goes check, check. The river is now 2 hearts, giving us a straight. And given this is heads up, plus the guy's on the straddle, I go ahead and just bet $50 thinking I'm good. However, the button raises us to $125, which is honestly not a huge raise. It's like, what, 1.5 times my bet? Is that right? Or 2.5x? So yeah, I just go ahead and make the call. I couldn't find the fold button here for such a small raise. And then the guy who's on the button shows 2-3 offsuit for a rivered boat. So he was honestly ahead the whole time. I think the only way I could have won this hand is if a 6 hit. So yeah, I was even drawing dead to the club. In hindsight, I shouldn't even be in this hand. So that's mistake number 1. The second mistake is I shouldn't be betting the flop. Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here. The third mistake is, let's say I do get to the river with a straight. I should just be check calling here just because he could have easily had a flush, like bigger straight. Actually, not the bigger straight. I have the nut straight, but he could have easily had clubs, or in this case, a boat, and then taken us to Value Town. And then by bet and getting raised on, especially for such a small sizing, it's really hard to fold with the straight, even though that would have been the right fold here. And I feel like because this guy's loose aggressive, I also paid him off. Had it been like a nitty player, I feel like it's easier to fold to them. But with loose aggressive guys, you just never know. Like, they're typically pretty capable. One thing I'm realizing is there's different types of loose aggressive players. Some who bluff and others who just see a lot of pots and only bet when they have value hands. And I think this guy falls into the latter camp after playing with him again, where he just sees a lot of flops and then bets when he has it or has a strong draw. We lose this one. Kind of sucked because this actually put me in the negative. I know I shouldn't be results oriented, but I feel like since I'm human, I do care about the results, and this ends up being a losing session. Although it could have been a bigger losing session, given that I had 2 massive blunders earlier. So with all things considered, given that I honestly didn't play that well, I felt like the loss was pretty minimal.